Hi guys, welcome back to the DeFi series. In this video, we will talk about largest lending protocols out there, which is Aave. We will see how it works, how it has evolved over the years, and where we stand today. We will also look how we can use Aave. It has something called testnet mode that enables you to experiment with it without using real funds. So we will see that as well. And one interesting fact about Aave is it currently stands at $23 billion TVL as of now, which is really huge. So we will cover lots of exciting stuff in today's episode. Let's get started. So first, let's understand what is Aave. So Aave is a decentralized protocol that allow users to borrow and lend cryptocurrencies in a decentralized manner. What I mean is it's a protocol that allows you to borrow and lend out your cryptocurrency without the need of any central authority or intermediaries like bank, and all of it is being done via the smart contracts. So if you want to access Aave, what you need is a wallet and an internet connection. You don't need bank to approve your loan. You don't need your KYC to be done. It's like this is the best thing about DeFi. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are. It just allows access to stuff and it treats everybody equal. So there are two things that we can do with Aave. So the first thing is we can supply assets. We can supply cryptocurrencies and then we can earn interest on top of it, which is like a passive income. Let's say if your cryptocurrency is sitting idle in your wallet, you may want to supply it to a lending protocol like Aave to earn some interest on top of it. And the other set of action is if you need to take a loan, you can take a loan from Aave by submitting a collateral. The only condition is the collateral needs to be over collateralized in most of the cases. And we have discussed how lending and borrowing works in the last video on MakerDAO. So I'll recommend you to check that video and then come to this one so that your understanding is super clear. So these are the two actions that we as user can do. So a few things that we need to note about Aave is it is non-custodial. So what I mean by that is all these DeFi protocols, what they do is they allow you to have custody of your own assets. It's like you have full control over your funds. And this is not we have seen in the traditional finance space, right? Where bank own the funds for us. Since all the transactions are stored on blockchain, it is transparent. Anybody can see what's going on. And the source code of Aave itself is open source. The smart contracts are available in public and you can just go and check what's happening under the hood. The other important thing, which is really cool about Aave, is how it is governed. So it is being governed by a community in a decentralized manner. So let's say if you have Aave token, then you can be part of this governance process. You can basically decide the direction in which the Aave protocol will go. So these are some of the features that are unique about Aave. So I hope it makes sense. So now we understand Aave. Let's walk through the history of Aave, like how it all started. So Aave was not initially called Aave. It was being called as ETHLend. So this goes back to 2017. A lawyer and a Finnish person, Stani Kulachov, came up with this idea of ETHLend, where he noticed the gap on Ethereum blockchain that you cannot do lending in a decentralized manner. So since Ethereum gave us power to write smart contracts, using these smart contracts, now two users were able to lend and borrow cryptocurrencies for the first time in 2017. And this ETHLend was able to raise money by using an initial coin offering. They raised around $16 million. They launched their token called Lend. So in 2017, what was happening was the lending and borrowing was being done in a peer-to-peer manner. So what I mean by that is, let's say if you require a loan, you will be able to get a loan only if somebody on the other side is willing to supply it to you. So what this resulted in was the liquidity was quite low. So users were not able to get the loan if there was not other person involved. And if I'm interested in supplying and nobody's interested in borrowing, then I'm not going to get the interest rate as a source of passive income. So overall in ETHLend, with time, Stani noticed the problem of low liquidity and it was not very efficient for users. So Back in 2018, at that point of time, what was happening was protocols like Uniswap and Compound were moving towards this model of liquidity pools. So even Stani came up with this idea of using liquidity pools so that now instead of a peer-to-peer decentralized lending, it's like peer to liquidity pool decentralized lending. And that's what gave birth to Aave in 2018. So ETHLend was being rebranded to Aave. The model was being changed to liquidity pools so that users can interact in an efficient manner. And with that, we see in January 2020, just before the DeFi summer was about to start, Aave launched their first version called V1. And during the same year, later in October, Aave launched their token called Aave, which replaced the previous token Lend. And at this point of time, users were given this option to upgrade their Lend token to Aave token at the ratio of 100 is to 1. So, moving further in the timeline, let's see what was being done in the first version of Aave. So, as we discussed, the concept of liquidity pools was introduced, and then the concept of A tokens was introduced. So, what happens is if, as a user, you supply your assets to Aave, in return, you will get a token called A token. So, let's say if you supplied ETH to the Aave protocol. So in return, you will get a ETH, and this a ETH is just like any ERC20 token. What is special about these A tokens is it's like interest accruing tokens. As the time passes and you are able to generate interest, it will be reflected in these A tokens. So at any point of time, if you want to withdraw your liquidity, so you can simply sell these A tokens, which will be like the original assets that you supplied, plus the interest that you have accrued. So that's how the supply was being tracked. And Aave became really popular in 2020 due to the launch of flash loans. So, flash loans are simply like a way for you to take a loan without submitting any collateral. Now you might be thinking, how is that even possible? Like, even banks don't allow us to take a loan without submitting a collateral, right? Let's say if you want to take a house loan, then you need to submit something as collateral. So, this is what makes Aave so special. So, what it means is you as a user can take a loan without submitting any collateral. The only condition is everything should happen in one single block. So this is also being called as one block loan, one block borrow. So as we know about this concept of transactions, right? So it's very similar to how it's in the database system. Like a transaction is executed, it can have n number of steps, and any of the steps fail, then the whole transaction will be reverted. Same applies to transactions on blockchain networks. If at any point of time anything fails, then the system will behave as if nothing happened. The only thing is, whenever you take a flash loan, you need to obviously pay the fees. So that was like one of the very core concepts about Aave that helped in gaining its popularity like anything. And within the same year, it was able to reach lots of users. The TVL grew like anything. All know the interest rates that the borrower needs to pay or the interest rate the suppliers will get is being determined by the market demand. So it's being done in an algorithmic manner depending on how much is the supply and demand in a particular liquidity pool, right? So usually we have seen the interest rates for borrow are usually variable. It means they'll keep on changing with time. But Aave V1 introduced this concept of stable borrow rates. What it means for user is if you want to borrow an asset, you will get like a stable rate that you need to pay, but usually these stable rates are more than the dynamic rates. But it's good for users who are not interested in taking the risk of volatile market. So this is what was being launched in Aave Vivan. And then in the end of 2020, what happened was Aave came up with an upgrade. So basically, they realized that when somebody supplies a tokens, we give them A tokens, which is good for managing. In this version, they tokenized everything. So let's say if you have taken a loan, even the tokens that you have taken a loan will be tokenized. And it really helps in tracking the tokens in an easier manner. The other important thing was regarding the safety of the protocol. because at this point of time, we see more and more TVL getting locked due to the DeFi summer. So Aave introduced a safety module. So what happens here is users who hold Aave token, they can stake their token into the protocol to ensure that it is safe. Now you might be wondering, as a user, I stake my token, but why will I do it? There has to be some incentives, right? So the incentive is you will get some staking rewards on top of it if you are securing the protocol. The only downside is in case there is a shortfall, if something happens in the Aave protocol, then what happens is the stakers who have staked the Aave tokens, their tokens will be slashed. So this is also coming with a risk. So be careful when you use the safety module of the risk that is involved in it. And then it also came up with improving the user experience part of it. So what happens was earlier, when I want to do a flash loan, I can just borrow one asset, right? So now what is happening is we will be able to batch all these flash loans in one transaction. So you can borrow multiple assets in one transaction. And important thing that was being introduced, keeping the user experience in mind, is the collateral swap. Let me explain what I mean by collateral swap. So let's say you have supplied ETH as collateral, and now you believe that maybe the price of ETH is going down and you might be in the risk of getting liquidated. What you can do is you can change your underlying collateral from ETH to any other crypto asset. Let's say you can change it to a stable coin like USDC. So collateral swap is being enabled through nature of flash loans. So flash loans enables us to do the arbitrage opportunities. They enable us to do the collateral swap, and then they also allow us to do self liquidation. Another feature that was really cool was credit delegation. So as you might have guessed from the name, when somebody supplies an asset, they get a certain borrowing power, right? That is what we call credit. I, as a user, what I can do is I can delegate this credit borrowing power to anybody else. So that's really powerful because the person that I delegate the power to is called a delegatee. They don't have to provide any collateral, and me being a delegator, I can earn interest on top of it. So this was another important thing that got introduced in the version V2. As we can see, a lot has happened in the year of 2020. So I hope all of it makes sense. Now, in March of 2022, Aave came up with a new version called V3, which is the current version that is out there. So let's see what features do we have in V3. For that, let's go to the docs of Aave. Okay. So if you see here, the Aave V3 was being launched, keeping the capital efficiency, the security, and the decentralization of the protocol in mind. So, first, let's discuss what was being done regarding capital efficiency. So, Aave introduced this concept of efficiency mode. So, efficiency mode, also known as E mode, what it enables you is as a borrower, you can get more borrowing power. And how it's done is, let's say if you have assets that are correlated in price. So this E mode supports 255 categories like stable coins, derivatives of ETH, derivatives of Bitcoin. If you are supplying the stable coin as collateral, the other stable coin that you can borrow will be having a more borrowing power. So in the previous versions, what used to happen is even if you used to supply stable coins, still you used to get around 75 to 80% of the borrowing power. But in this case, if you're supplying a stable coin, you will get up to 98% of the borrowing power because since the assets are correlated, there is less risk exposure. Okay. So now you might be wondering, okay, having this E mode is cool, but what are the use cases for it, right? So some of the use cases that efficiency mode enables are to have efficient yield farming. What I mean by that is you supply a derivative of ETH, and in return you will get to borrow ETH, and the ETH that you can borrow will be like much more than that was the case earlier, and you can use the ETH that you borrowed to maybe buy more ETH if you believe that the price of ETH will go up. So that will really help in doing the yield farming. The other use case that it enables is to do forex trading in a high leverage manner, and then you can diversify the risk management basically, because here you are dealing with the correlated assets. The next feature related to capital efficiency that was being introduced was isolation mode. So, what happens is if any asset on the protocol is listed as isolated, what it means is if I supply an isolated asset as collateral, I, as a borrower, cannot club any other asset to be supplied as collateral, right? If I even try to like supply other assets, what will happen is I'll keep on getting the interest rate on top of it, but I cannot use them as collateral. So in isolation mode, I can just supply one collateral, and that has to be the asset that has been marked as isolated. So what it enables is when an asset has been put in the isolation mode, what happens is they will have this concept of debt ceiling. What I mean by that is the maximum amount that anybody can borrow for that asset. So let's take an example, right? So let's say if you are supplying an isolated asset, what you can do is you can just provide that one asset as collateral, and you can only borrow stable coins for that. So stable coins like USDC, USDT, and DAI can only be borrowed, and it really helps in mitigating the risk. So isolation mode is really important for assets that are pretty new or that have certain risk associated to it. So if you are in isolation mode, you can supply any asset, but that will be only used to capture the yields and be treated as collateral. The collateral will be only this isolated asset, and you can borrow only stable coins, unlike the normal case where you can supply anything and borrow anything. The other important feature that has been introduced is portals. So portals allow the liquidity to be flown across different blockchain networks. So let's say you have a liquidity pool for ETH, let's say on Ethereum network. And all these pools are being called as markets in the Aave terminology. So if you have this pool on Ethereum network, you can just access the liquidity on any other blockchain network, let's say like Arbitrum. So what happens in this case is since it's like we are communicating across networks, like a cross chain communication, we obviously need bridges, right? So all these bridges are being approved by governance. And what happens is in the source network, in our case, in the ETH network, will burn the A tokens. So basically, we are using A tokens for this. We'll burn the A tokens. And then on the destination network, like in our case on Arbitrum, we will mint those A tokens. And since it's being done instantly, the underlying asset, the actual asset, will be supplied to the destination network in a deferred manner. So that's how the portals work. As you can see here, these are the different chains Aave supports. So you can access your liquidity across different networks without you having to actually withdrawing your liquidity and then bridging it to other network manually. It's all being taken care of by the Aave protocol itself. One more thing that is not being called out in the doc, which is Aave V3 introduced this concept of supply and borrow cap. What I mean by that is each of these liquidity pools will have a cap on the assets that could be supplied or that could be borrowed. And this is like one of the security measures that the protocol has taken. That's it what we have in the V3. And in July 2023, Aave came up with this idea of launching their own stable coin called Go. In case you might be wondering why Aave introduced a native stable coin instead of using other stable coins, the idea is Go is decentralized, unlike USDC and USDT, where it's being controlled by certain entities. So this is completely decentralized. Go is pegged to $1 and it's being backed by assets in the Aave protocol. And how you can get Go? So you can get Go by submitting a collateral, and then you will be able to mint Go. So Go has taken inspiration from the other decentralized stablecoin that we have talked in the last video from MakerDAO called DAI. Now it's being called as USDS. And whatever fees, whatever interest is being generated from this borrowing process is being given to the Aave DAO. It's being added to the Aave treasury. So that's how the plan of Aave protocol is to increase their revenue by having their own stable coin. And we will see later on what benefits do you have if you hold the Go token. So this is how the history of Aave looked like. We have seen how it has transitioned from ETHLend to what we now known as Aave, and we are currently at version 3. 4 has been announced. It will be launched this year sometime. And in the version 4, the protocol is playing around more with Go optimizations, the stablecoin optimizations, and then adding the support for RWA assets and other interesting innovative stuff to bridge the gap between the institutional finance and the traditional finance. So now let's understand how Aave works and what sort of actions can a user take. So the suppliers, what they do is they supply their assets into the liquidity pool. You can think of liquidity pool as a smart contract that holds the assets. These liquidity pools are called markets in Aave. So the suppliers deposit their assets in the liquidity pool, and the idea is they want to earn interest on top of it. The people who are interested in borrowing, they can borrow from this liquidity pool by providing extra collateral. And in case you might be wondering, like, this flow is very similar to any borrowing and lending flow. How are the interest rate calculated? Because in the case of traditional finance, the banks are the ones that decide the interest rate, right? Like if you want to take a house loan, banks are the ones they say, okay, we will charge 12%, 10%. It's being defined by banks. So everything is under control of a single entity. That was the case with banks. That's not how DeFi works. So in the case of Aave, the interest rates are being determined in an algorithmic manner through the market demand and supply. So let's see how the interest rates are being calculated in case I supplied my tokens. So the interest rate for the supply tokens, the supply APY that we see is being calculated using the borrow utilization rate. So what I mean by that is that's the assets that are being currently borrowed against the total supply in a particular liquidity pool. And that borrow utilization rate helps in determining the interest rate for supplied tokens. And these interest rates are very dynamic. They'll change when liquidity is being supplied, liquidity is being borrowed, when you as a user are repaying your loan, or you as a liquidity provider are withdrawing from the pool. So all of these actions that somebody can do in a liquidity pool impact the interest rate. So the kind of actions that somebody can do is if I have supplied, I can withdraw. If I've taken a loan, I need to repay it back, right? So all these actions affect the interest rate. Now we understand how the interest rate for suppliers are being calculated. So now let's see how the interest rate for borrowers are being calculated. So again, this interest rate is based on the utilization rate that we talked about. It's the same concept. It will check the total liquidity that is there in a pool, and then we'll see how much is borrowed. So the total borrowed against the total supply in a pool is how you calculate the utilization rate. Basically maps back to demand and supply scenario. So now let's take a scenario where the utilization rate is high. What we mean by that is the ratio of borrow to total supply is increasing. What it means is more and more people are coming into a liquidity pool and they're borrowing the assets. So what happens is, in this case, if more people are borrowing, there will be less assets available for borrow. So what will happen in such a case is the interest rate will increase, because now the protocol wants users who are holding these tokens, who have taken loan, to pay back the tokens. And if we impose a higher interest rate, people would want to close their loans. That will again make the number of tokens in the pool increase. So it's basically adjusting the demand to in such a scenario to ensure that the liquidity pool is functioning well. And all these parameters that we are discussing, the interest rate as a supplier and as a borrower, is very specific to a liquidity pool. You will see it will vary across different pools, and it will also vary across different networks. Now we understand how the interest rate are being determined. Let's talk about an important scenario from the borrower's point of view. So liquidation is something that you always need to take care of if you are borrowing an asset. Liquidations and LTV and liquidation threshold is something that we have already covered in the last video. I'll recommend you guys to check out the video on MakerDAO. Each of the liquidity pools will have their own LTVs, it will have their own liquidation thresholds. As the name suggests, LTV is the loan to value ratio. Health factor is something which is calculated using this formula. So basically, it's like we have collateral and then we have asset that we have borrowed. So in the case of borrowing, the basic idea is at any point of time, the collateral shouldn't drop below the borrowed amount, right? So whenever that happens, you are at the risk of getting liquidated. So this health factor is calculated by the total collateral value multiplied by the weighted average liquidation threshold. The whole thing that we get is being divided by the total borrow value. So if this health factor that you see in the Aave app, if it goes below 1, then you are at the risk of liquidation. This liquidation threshold that you see in the formula is being set by Aave governance. It basically means the maximum percentage of value that can be borrowed against your asset that has been kept collateral. So whenever the health factor drops below 1, liquidation happens, and basically it means the collateral was not sufficient to cover the borrowed amount. So what happens in case of liquidations is usually up to a 50% of a borrower's debt is repaid by the liquidator. And then whenever a liquidation happens, the borrower is being charged the liquidation fees to ensure that the protocol doesn't incentivize such activity. I hope liquidation is clear to you. So now we understand all the actions that user can do and the basic concepts. Now let's talk about the tokenomics of Aave. So the Aave token is the governance token of the Aave protocol. So what I mean by that is we talked about how Aave is decentralized, right? There is no single entity which is governing Aave. So what happens is there are people who hold this Aave token, and the Aave token holders are the one that decide the future of Aave. So it's like the decision making is being done in a decentralized and transparent manner. So now let's see, other than governance, what all are the utilities for Aave token? So the other utility is these Aave tokens can be supplied to liquidity pools. And once you supply them to a liquidity pool, you can basically earn yields on top of it. And not just to Aave protocol, you can supply Aave to any of the DEXs or any other app in the DeFi space. And the other thing that we already touched upon is if you're a holder of Aave, you can stake your tokens in the Aave safety module, which will enhance the security of the system. And in return, you will get some rewards for securing the system. And if you're somebody who has Aave and who has staked Aave, there's another good news for you. So one thing is you're for sure ensuring the security of the system and you're earning rewards in return. And on top of it, the staking Aave can also allow you to access Go, the native stable coin, at a reduced borrowing rates. So this is like you are getting multiple layer of incentives when you hold Aave. If you're a holder of Aave, you can supply it to a liquidity pool or interest. You can take a loan on it by supplying Aave as collateral, or maybe if you're not interested in the liquidity pool, you just want to stake it, you can stake it. So these are some of the use cases for the Aave token. Now we understand what's the utility of Aave and how crucial it is. Now let's talk about the stablecoin Go. So Go stablecoin is decentralized over collateralized stablecoin, which is backed by the Aave protocol. That seems like a lot of jargons, right? Let me break it for you. So when we say stablecoin, we mean the value of Go is pegged to $1, right? And then it's over collateralized in the sense that Go is being minted by users on demand. So what happens is if you want Go, what you will do is you will supply a collateral and then you will be able to mint Go. In this case, Go has been inspired from MakerDAO and DAI. And so now you understand the collateral that you submit will always be more than the Go that you are minting. That's the reason it is over collateralized. And that one of the reasons that helps in maintaining its spec. Then the second bit was how Go is decentralized. So Go is decentralized and compared to its other alternatives like USDC and USDT, in the sense that it's being backed by assets that the protocol holds. And those assets are stored in the smart contract, and the Go interest rate and the cap, the supply and the borrow cap, everything, all the parameters related to Go are being maintained, are being governed by the Aave governance, the Aave DAO. Basically, with Go, you can also do flash minting, as in you don't have to really provide a collateral. You can still mint Go, which is done with the help of flash loans. So, and then we also have a stability module for Go that helps to maintain Go spec to $1. In case you want to read more about Go, you can check out this document. Basically, these are some of the interesting stuff about the native stablecoin. So flash loans in itself is a pretty complex topic, and It could be used for arbitrage, it could be used for self liquidation, and also for collateral swap. So it's basically something that we have discussed in the past. And if you want to learn about flash loans in depth, let me know. It will require its own separate video. So it was basically always for technical people who understand how smart contracts are being returned and stuff. But here, if you can see, there are certain interfaces that allows you to integrate flash loans like DeFi Saver, InstaDApp, Furu Combo. You can check them out if you want to explore flash loans in depth. Okay, that's enough of theory. I hope now you have understood how Aave works. Let's see it from a practical standpoint. So we will launch the app. This is how it looks like at the dashboard. So by default, we are at the core instance, version 3. So Aave calls different blockchain networks as markets. So you can see here different blockchain networks that Aave supports. You can select whichever you like. So if you see here, we are on Ethereum mainnet, and this is the dashboard for the user. I've already connected my wallet. You can see your supplies on the left and your borrows on the right. So for this walkthrough, we will see it in test mode. We don't have to spend real money. So if you see here under the settings tab, they have something called testnet mode. We will turn it on. So here we are in the testnet mode. So everything we do here is not real money and we can just play around with it. So this gives like a really cool playground to experiment with Aave. I'll recommend you guys to definitely check it out in testnet mode. If you want money on testnet, we can use faucet. So if you see here, it takes you to the Ethereum Sepolia faucet. So in the case of Ethereum network, we are using the Sepolia testnet, and this is the faucet that is there. You can simply get these assets for free. I already have some of these assets that I got. If you see at the top, it shows my net worth, net APY. This is the total APY of my supplies and borrows, and we see a health factor. Remember about this health factor, we said it shouldn't drop below 1. So in our case, it's green, which is good. That's how it should be. So we talked about this whole flow in theory in the past. We will see it in action in this demo. So in this case, I've checked this show assets with zero balance just to show you guys what all assets I can supply. I'll turn it off. So now these are the assets that I currently hold. And let's take example of Link. So Link is the token for Chainlink. And if you see here, the APY that we will get on supply Chainlink is 289%, and it could be also supplied as collateral. So what I mean by that is once you supply Link, you can take loan on top of it if required. So I've already supplied 100 links, and I've set collateral as enabled. So now what we can do is we can borrow assets if we require, and you can see the APY that the borrowers need to pay. This is the interest that the borrower needs to pay to take the loan. So let's say we are supplying Link and we want DAI. So we'll click on borrow. You can show you how much DAI you want, and then it will show you the health factor. If you want to check the details, let's go into it. So it will show you the various reserve details, the supply information, the LTV, right? This is the loan to value ratio that we discussed. This is liquidation threshold. And then this is the liquidation penalty. In case you get liquidated, you will pay 5% as penalty. And you can see various other infos related to both supply and borrow, and basically borrow the DAI if you require. So in this case, since the supply is at 100%, so you cannot supply DAI, but we can borrow. So let's try to borrow it. Let's try to borrow 1000 DAI. And if we do that, it shows us the health factor that we currently have is going to drop. So let's borrow DAI. So if you see, it says I have borrowed 1K DAI. And if I want to track the balance, I can add it to my wallet. So this DAI token that you see, I can add this. And let me close this. So if we go back to the dashboard, we can see DAI in the our borrows category. And this is how basically you can supply assets and then borrow assets. And here they have given the markets overview. So let's say for Ethereum market, the assets that are there, and you can see how much of these assets are supplied and how much of these are borrowed in one place. So this is like the right place if you want to see which asset you want to deal with. So as we see here, every asset is having a different supply and a borrow APY. So if you're a supplier, this is the APY that is of interest to you. If you are a borrower, this is the APY that you should look out for. So this gives you like a good overview of each asset in that particular market. So if you see here, we have talked about dashboard, markets, and then the Aave governance is also there, which is just available on the Ethereum mainnet. So this is where people who are interested in adding new features or changing the interest rate, adding new networks, propose something here. So this is where the proposals are being done. And then anybody who is having the Aave tokens, they can vote in favor or against it. And if they don't want to vote, they can delegate their vote to others. So others can vote on behalf of them. So this is the governance part. And this is where the faucet is. This is just applicable to testnet. And then we have this option of bridge Go. So basically, you can bridge Go, the native stablecoin, from one network to another network. And they also have given this option to switch tokens, which is basically to swap tokens. That is another feature that is being supported here. One thing to note here is if I turn off the testnet mode, we can see we have this option of staking. So staking is something that is available only on Ethereum mainnet. So let's go a little deeper into staking here. So if you see, we can stake Aave, we can stake Go, we can stake ABPT. So ABPT is the balancer pool for staked Aave and wrapped ETH. So that's another thing that you can do. And if you see, for each of these, they have given the staking APR. This is the rewards that you will earn when you stake your assets. And this maximum slashing that you see is something that will happen in case of a shortfall. So let's say, so if you are staked Aave, then maximum 30% could be slashed. If you are staked Go, then maximum 99% could be slashed. And 30% is also for ABPT. So this is how the staking works. And one more thing to note here is if you have staked Aave, then you get STK Aave. So if you have the staked Aave, then what you can do is you can borrow Go at a discounted rate. So that's another benefit of staking Aave. So now let's go to dashboard. And if you see, I want to talk about one more thing, which is E mode. This was not enabled in the testnet mode, but you can basically enable it on the real app. So if required, you can enable the E mode from here and basically increases your LTV for correlated assets. So if you see here, it asks us to select the category that we want to enable E mode for. ETH correlated, it could be USD, stablecoin, and then various other things. So let's say in our case, if we select ETH correlated, so these are the assets that I can use, and the maximum LTV that I'll get is 93%, which was not possible to get earlier. And if I select stable coins, then you can see the maximum LTV is 90%. So you can see how switching to the E mode allows you to borrow more assets if the asset prices are correlated. So this is another interesting feature that got introduced in V3 that we talked about. It's good to see it in action here. And if we scroll down, another important thing is we see this isolated tag, right? It's being marked for maker as we see. So let's see the details for it. Basically means this asset can only be used as collateral in isolation mode only. And you can see the various details regarding it. And since it is isolated, it will have a debt ceiling. This is the maximum that anybody can borrow for this asset. And you can play around with these parameters. Isolated is another parameter that you need to keep in mind whenever you are dealing with Aave. With that, we come to an end of the video. I hope it was useful. If it was, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.